When you claim your justice man,
Thank you. Thanks, Lynette. I want to thank everyone that everyone has thanked. Lynette's been awesome. Boulder Unified, Boulder Valley Gifted and Talented, and Macintosh Academy. It's great that you guys are there. And the school, thank you for staying open. And I want to say that you guys are tough, because I did this a couple years ago in Minnetonka, Minnesota, and the snowstorm came out of nowhere, and only half the people showed up. So you guys are way tougher than them. I guess this is on video. So I don't know if I should have said that. Okay. And I'm really glad that there's so many younger people out there, because this stuff is really important information for you guys to learn about yourselves. And speaking as a older person, and speaking for a lot of the older people in this audience, I'm thinking that all of us would have liked to get some of this information when we were younger. And the whole point here is to learn about different aspects of how we tick as human beings. And for those of us who tick at more intense levels and sensitive levels than others, you have a unique life experience, and sometimes that life experience results with worries and anxieties and things that we're going to talk about. And that's the worry monster. So we're going to talk about the worry monster. We're going to talk about kicking the worry monster out of town. And we're going to talk about developing language and strategies for understanding what anxiety is, why we have it, why we don't need it, and how we can get rid of it, right? Is that a plan? Okay. It's a team approach. Got to click my clicker on. Okay. So, who is the worry monster? So the idea of the worry monster is it is this thing, it's this imaginary thing, okay, for you people who have really strong imaginations. I want you to think of it as an imaginary thing, but also don't think of it as a thing that's going to come and spook you. It is a goofy, dorky little bully that comes around and tries to trick us. And the whole idea is, if we can understand what the worry monster is like and how he works, we get stronger than it. So the worry monster does not like us to talk about him. He does not like us to know that he exists. He likes to stay lurking in the shadows, make us feel bad, make us avoid things, and make us feel weak and puny and scared. You got that? So just by virtue of us talking about him, you guys are all going to take a little more control over him. And now there's an example. The Wizard of Oz. Okay, show of hands, who has seen the original Wizard of Oz? Excellent. The new one is pretty good, but the old one is still the classic. Okay, so let's go to the last scene, or almost the last scene, right? They finally get to the wizard, and they were pretty excited because everyone was going to get everything that they were looking for. Dorothy's going to go home, the lion's going to get some courage, right? All that stuff. Well, then what happens? Angry, booming voices with green smoke, and everyone's scared. The lion ditches off to the side, right? I don't forget what the Tin Man does, but everyone's freaked out, except one little creature. Thank you. Toto, the brave one among them, pulls the curtain back. And who's behind the curtain? A little short man on a power trip, who we find is a weak, insecure human being who is bullying these nice characters into being scared and powerless, right? And then what immediately happens? Nothing changes except Toto has pulled back the curtain. So what immediately happens? Everyone gets strong. Everyone gets courageous. Everyone gets confident. And now Dorothy all of a sudden is problem solving, and the lion has courage, and the Tin Man has his heart, and the Scarecrow has a brain, right? Did I get that one right? Okay. And nothing has changed except their perception of reality. That is all the worry monster is. Tricks us, tricks our kids into being scared because he has these tricks that he plays on us. All right. Everyone with me? Okay. So, we're going to be bouncing back a little bit between what anxiety is, fear is, and then going to learn about gifted characteristics and why, in my experience, gifted individuals tend to be more susceptible to different types of worries and anxieties. And then we're going to end up with talking about lots of strategies that you can do that are really, 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 really effective in helping your kids overcome anxiety, your students, and you guys out there themselves, things that you guys can do to take a fight against the worry monster. So, for the purpose of tonight, we're going to simplify anxiety as an irrational fear. Okay? Irrational fear means that it doesn't really make sense, but our brain tricks us into thinking something will happen. For example, you better believe that everyone who cares about me was reminding me how dangerous it is to fly in a snowstorm and what's going to happen if the plane gets derailed or if the plane doesn't take off and all of this stuff, right? So a lot of times people are afraid of flying because people think something really bad's going to happen, when in reality, we are much safer driving in a snowstorm, we're much safer flying than you'd even be flying in a snowstorm or just driving every day to school. But we usually don't worry about that stuff, right? Because our brain doesn't trick us into that sort of stuff. So I did, since I'm an expert worrier, by the way. I'm a worrier in recovery and a perfectionist in recovery, like many of you out here. And so since I do this for a living and have lived it, I just used my worry monster strategies, and I told Lynette, it's going to be fine, right? It's going to be fine. And so when my mom said, well, what are you going to do if all this happens? I said, I'll figure it out when it happens. But here I am. I didn't have to, and so all that worrying was for nothing. Okay, so irrational fear. So what happens is we get this thought that makes us think that something really bad might happen, might being the key word. However, we need to know why we have fear. Fear is needed. We need fear to survive as human beings. So I want to take you back to your ancestors, our ancestors. You might not remember this, but at one time we were primitive people living on the Serengeti, living in deserts, and we were hunters and gatherers. And what was going on then? Well, there were big animals who were trying to eat us, and there were other tribes who were trying to take our stuff, right? And it's one of those things, it's not like a video game where you get like 3 lives and you start right over. It's pretty serious stuff. So what happened was we had to develop this part of our brain called the amygdala that is our fear center. And the amygdala's job is to sense danger. Sounds like this. So if you hear that every once in a while, that's what it is. It's your amygdala. Okay. So the amygdala's job is to sense danger, only so we could do fight or flight, right? You guys learn about that in school, the fight or flight response. We talk about that with animals a lot, but we animals have that too. Fight or flight. That means fight as hard as you can to survive, or flight, for us, run as fast as you can for one purpose, survive. Right? So that's it. That's why we have the amygdala. The thing is often our amygdalas are turned on when we don't need them to be turned on. How many of you have almost been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger during a math test? All right, it's happened. It's happened. It's rare, but it happens. Okay, it happens. So the thing is, and I brought the plastic brain. Would you be my brain helper? You don't have to be my brain helper. That's all right. That's all right. This is a challenging task here. Okay, so do you see this? Hopefully you say no because it's so small. All right, so it is this little almond-shaped thing called the amygdala. This tiny little thing is our fear center. Now the thing about all of you smart, gifted people out there is this is our frontal lobe. That's where you do all of your great higher order thinking. This is why we are masters of the universe, because we have big frontal lobes where we can problem solve, create, innovate, design. This huge thing is rendered powerless by that little itty bitty almond shaped amygdala right there. That's the thing that runs our lives when we are not needing to survive. Okay, so I'm going to keep making this point over and over because it's key. It's only there for survival, and most of the time, for those of us who live in pretty decent places, like this beautiful area that you guys live in, fortunately, we are not in life-threatening situations, but we have children who are often feeling that way because of the way their alarm system is going off. What I didn't say is that I have 3 kids, 9, 11, and 13, who also are these kids. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, I come to you as a parent as well as a person who works with kids and families on this stuff. Okay, so what happens? This is our fear, fight, or flight response. Danger. Right when our amygdala senses danger, it sends a messages as quick as possible to our adrenal glands, which are right above our kidneys, to send as much adrenaline as possible through our body. Why do we need adrenaline? So we can run as fast as we can and fight as hard as we can. That's it. That's the system. But something happens when we get all this adrenaline, and it usually happens when we don't need it. And I said here as a joke, like, would that be cool if I had adrenaline surge right now while I'm talking to you guys? No, that's when people like stare or drop the microphone and run out of the room, which is not conducive to getting more speaking engagements at all. Okay, so for all of you out there, this is what happens. This is actually really, really cool because our bodies are made to survive. So our heart and our lungs, when we are in the fight or flight response, our heart starts beating really, really fast, feels like it's going to pop out of our chest. And our chest constricts and we have shortness of breath because we're conserving our airflow to run and fight. The reason this is happening is that our heart is getting all the blood and the adrenaline to our arms and our legs. Right? So that's the system right here. This is our central system. It's pumping through our body. But then what happens is you guys might get stomach aches, stomach nausea, have to go to the bathroom a lot, butterflies. Well, guess what? Do you think you need all the blood in your stomach when you're running for your life or fighting for your life, or do you need that blood in your arms and your legs? Mm-hmm. Yes. So our body shuts down our stomach because we don't need to digest our Big Macs when we're running for our life. That's for a later time. Now, equally, our brain has some symptoms too. Our head starts to maybe feel hot, dizzy. People feel like they're going a little nutty, lightheaded. You feel like you're going to pass out. Hot flashes, you can't think, right? This isn't good during a test. Now, our brain happens to carry most of our blood, and our blood leaves our brain to go to our arms and our legs, which is why those of you who have or had test anxiety and worry that you're going to forget everything that you studied the night before, you are. And the reason you are is right when you get afraid you're going to worry or you're going to forget everything, all the blood leaves your brain so you can't think. We'll talk about strategies for that later. Okay, there are strategies for that. Okay, so that's what happens to your brain. And now arms and legs, this is really cool. So a lot of people get tingling sensations in their arms and their legs and sweatiness, and it becomes a little, kind of have those faint feelings in your extremities. Well, since we are built to be surviving machines, even though all the blood goes to our arms and our legs, it goes away from our skin, the level of our skin, the surface area of our skin, so we can be wounded in battle and not bleed to death. How cool is that? And really helpful during a math test. The reason it's important to know this stuff is because we need to become friends with our body and our sensations. We need to be able to talk to our kids, and you guys out there say, oh, it's happening again. Right? So the adult version is going to the emergency room when they're having a panic attack. We're going to talk about panic attacks. Panic attacks are the number one reason people go to the emergency room, and they're the number one reason people leave the emergency room very embarrassed. Because there is nothing physiologically that's happened except this surge, okay? And one of the things that we need to do to help people of all ages deal with panic is know, I'm not gonna die, I'm not having a heart attack, I just need to ride this awful wave and it will pass. So just finding a different relationship with the symptoms changes the worry monster's power right there. Right there, if you can learn to identify where your body feels your fight or flight response, you're going to know that the worry monster is visiting and that he doesn't have to have that much power over you, because all he's trying to do is trick you. So then extra adrenaline is not good unless we're needing it, like you're skiing or you're playing sports or you're doing something where extra adrenaline puts you in that zone and you're doing the peak performance thing. But when we're in a scary situation, extra adrenaline just pumps more and more of those symptoms into rendering us totally powerless and almost like deer in headlights, right? So sometimes there's a fight and flight response, and sometimes there's just the freeze response, and that's not good either. And the thing that happens is the more we think scary thoughts, the more the worry monster puts these scary thoughts into our head, which are irrational, the more adrenaline goes through your body, and the more you are freaking out. Period. It's that simple. It's not simple to experience, but it's that simple with the way it works. I always talk about the worry monster, as we're going to talk about his strategies, as being really smart and really stupid at the same time. And the reason he is smart is because he uses the same simple strategies over and over and over again. You're going to fail the test. You're not going to make the team. You're never going to get into college. You're never, ever going to have a friend. And what happens is he's also kind of dumb because he uses the same things over and over and over again. And the way we outsmart him is we're just onto him. And then he doesn't really have that much more up his sleeve, except he'll switch it up on us a little bit. Okay. Panic attacks. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to quickly go through what do I call the ballparks of anxiety. These are mostly the clinical diagnoses, but we're not diagnosing anyone, or everyone, and I don't want everyone to think automatically, oh my God, I have all of those things. That's a typical response to a good worrier. And any of us who have gone through graduate school or medical school, that's what they say, is like you think you leave thinking you have like everything that's wrong with a human being. But the thing is, we all have these tendencies. This is just so you can identify or recognize any of these ballparks in your child, or for you guys who are out there, because depending on what the worry is or the way the worry monster is working, depends on the strategies that we'll use to get rid of him. So we already talked about a panic attack. This is the full-blown physiological fight and flight response, but there's no fighting or flighting. It's just like full surge overload, right? The surge protector blows and you just think that you are going to literally die and not be able to handle life. What I find a lot of times is that kids, adolescents have slightly adapted versions of this called, like we call anxiety attacks, right? So panic attacks are petrifying and get you, like I said, to the emergency room sometimes if you're scared. Anxiety attacks, they're awful, but they're just not necessarily to that level. And again, we don't want to overreact and we don't want to underreact when it comes to any of the things that we're talking about tonight. Agoraphobia. So agoraphobia is stereotypically what people think about when they see a person who's being filmed on TV and hasn't left their home in 30 years, right? That's a person who's afraid to leave their house. The fear in an agoraphobic response is that you're afraid you're going to have a panic attack and not be able to escape, or you're going to be in an excruciatingly humiliating situation and not be able to escape. The key word is you can't get out, so you stay in the comfort of your own home and or stay really close to your mom always, right, is the little person version. Now, this is an example of why it's so important for us to fight the worry monsters when our kids are having them, because agoraphobia is something that starts small and mushrooms. And now I'm not saying that all fears will mushroom. I'm not saying that at all. But avoidance is the worry monster's best friend. If the worry monster can bring his pal avoidance into town, he's got you. And he's got your kid. Because basically, I'm not playing soccer. I'm not going to drama. Nope, I'm not going to the math club. I'm just going to stay here with you forever, right? And what happens is over time, everything gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So in an older person's version of a panic attack, is a situation occurs where, I'm going to give you one example of a high school student that I had worked with. She, out of the blue, had a panic attack. They were in a car, and they were in the mountains. So all of a sudden, she started to get freaked out anytime she was in a car and anytime she was in the mountains, either or. Then what happened is she had about 3 monster drinks and had another panic attack. Because what does a monster drink do? Speed up your heart. You know, what does caffeine and stimulants do? Speed up your heartbeat. So then she freaked out, and she was an athlete. And she then associated that every time that her heart rate was up, she could have a panic attack. So she stopped playing soccer, she stopped playing lacrosse, and she stopped running. All because of her fear that she was going to have another panic attack, which she didn't realize she was inducing in a natural way anyways by drinking monster drinks or doing sports. Other versions of this look like, I have a panic attack in an Italian restaurant. Now, every time I see Italian food, I get nervous it's going to happen again. And I don't want to go to the grocery store, especially near the Italian food aisle where they sell pizza and they might have pasta sauce. And then if I smell it at home, it just goes and goes. You see how it just mushrooms? Now the thing is, before the internet, it definitely took a well-meaning, loving family member to help a person stay alive as an agoraphobic, right? Who's going to get your food? Who's going to do everything for you? Nowadays, you can just, I don't even think you have to leave your house, right? You can just order everything. And I know a lot of kids who have severe anxiety who have decided at age 12 that they are going to work from home in their room the rest of their life and never talk to any human being because you don't have to anymore. Which is unfortunately true. But that career is fine if you choose it because you love what you do, you work on a computer, and you don't need to be around a lot of people except to email and to Skype. But choosing anything out of fear is not good, right? That means that fear and the worry monster is running your life. So when it comes to any kind of fear, agoraphobia is just the example of we have to take steps against the worry monster and help people get victories, because victories keep them away and keep the thing from mushrooming. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. Now, I happen to know for a fact that there are many people in this audience who have obsessive compulsive quirks. And don't pretend you don't. Because the thing is that for some reason, people on the higher end of the intellectual continuum tend to think way too much and have a whole bunch of rules for a whole bunch of things that don't really matter. Yes, you're all smiling. Okay. So these things, so an obsessive compulsive disorder, though, is when you have intrusive, distressing, and irrational thoughts repeatedly that you can't get rid of, and you have to do something over and over and over again to take the anxiety away and to make the thought go away. For example, if I don't kiss my mom the same amount of times on each cheek before bed, something bad might happen to her, right? So with the OCD monster, or worry monster, however you want to call him, tricks people into thinking that you actually have some control over the universe by doing something that often feels really silly that you try to hide because you don't want people to know you're doing it. Right? I have lots of clients who get really good at dropping their pencil at just the right time so they can touch their feet the certain way they need to touch their feet. And you just spend, so what happens is a lot of these bright kids, you're so smart, they're using half of their brain if you have OCD. You're using half of your brain to do your OCD stuff while you're still pulling down good grades and doing the rest of your thing. Your brain is like that occupied. I've worked with families who, this dad and their twin sons, and they would sit in my one of those offices that I had and had a picture. Honora Spence was the artist. And the dad said to one of the sons, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm doing the thing with the letters where, you make the letters go in a certain, you had this whole equation." And the other brother said, "You've been doing that too?" And they go, "Yeah, I've been doing it for months in here." And the dad's like, "Wow, I started doing that when I came to this office too." And these are really, all these guys are bent towards this way. And they're all doing these number games and have these amazing abilities to do these number games, but they can't stop themselves from doing the number games. That's the problem. So a lot of times we see this in kids. And again, something I didn't say this morning I realized to the folks is all of the stuff we're talking about is not a problem unless it's a problem. right? Because everyone's going to ask, like, you'll be thinking, well, is this a problem or not? It's really, is it a problem? Like, a problem is something that causes a lot of distress and has functional impairment. It affects home, affects school, affects a person's well-being. That's what we're looking at when we're saying, do we need to really address this thing in a targeted way, right? And if it's kind of a problem, you can do it at home. If it's a major problem, that's when you often have to get some outside help and an outside guide. But this is the place always to start, is to try to do this stuff at home. Specific phobia. John Madden does not fly on airplanes. That's a specific phobia. Some people don't like to go on bridges. Some people don't like to see spiders, snakes. They don't go camping. They don't go to the zoo. One that I've seen become increasingly a problem is dogs. So it seems innocent, and you just don't get a dog, but then you can't go to the soccer field, you can't go to the park, you can't go on picnics, you can't go to people who have dogs and new dog, and it just mushrooms. And usually, specific phobias are the easiest things to avoid, right? Because you could just get around them, it's specific. Again, I still will say that you've got to hit this stuff straight on, and we're going to talk about different ways to do that work. Social phobia. Okay. Sometimes gifted kids feel different. Sometimes gifted kids don't fit in. Sometimes gifted kids are really sensitive and shy. And sometimes they're really scared, worried about being embarrassed. And a social phobia is really about being intensely embarrassed. It's like an extreme form of shyness. Now, there's nothing wrong with shyness, and there's nothing wrong with introversion. It so happens, research shows about 2/3 to 3/4 of gifted people tend to be more on the introverted spectrum than the extroverted spectrum. And there's nothing wrong with that. For some reason, we have a world that thinks that extroversion is the way to be. You don't need to be that way. One friend is great. If you can have that one meaningful friend, that's awesome. A social phobia is when you avoid things because you are so fearful of humiliation that it's going to be the worst thing in the world. So these are all degrees. PTSD. So a lot of us know about PTSD through our veterans. PTSD, and will be more rare in a lot of situations, is where someone has experienced a life-threatening or experienced or witnessed a life-threatening situation to themselves or others, and the response is really one of terror because it was so scary. And then a person develops a lot of emotional numbing, jumpiness, irritability, nightmares, and all this stuff. What we see more often in the gifted realm is that kids who have been bullied and misunderstood and mistreated in the schools chronically develop low-level symptoms of this. And we see it quite a bit. And because these kids, as we'll talk about, tend to be more sensitive than the average Joe or Jane, so they're also more affected. I'm not excusing the behavior that they're subjected to, but also it tends to be really impactful. And sometimes these kids have to be what we call unschooled, which is sort of a reset button so they can get back in the game, in the appropriate game, and it actually can be really successful. So the only point I'm just making is bullying and being misunderstood can be really impactful to a sensitive, gifted kid. Generalized anxiety disorder. We're almost through these guys. This is kind of the boring stuff. So the generalized anxiety, GAD, that is the worry monster, the big worry monster. You're worrying about everything. Do I look okay? Are you going to come pick me up? Who's going to be my friend? Am I going to get into college? How do I know if I get it right? What if I get it wrong? What if I don't win? What if I'm not good? Right? All this stuff. Nonstop. Question. And now we know that gifted kids ask amazing amounts of questions. That's not a bad thing. It's an exhausting thing, but that's not a bad thing. If all the questions are related to worry, we need to do something about that. If the worry monster is speaking through you or your child's mouth, we need to do something about that because that is distressing and it's just tired worry. And again, it keeps us from doing all the other things that you could be doing with your great minds. Separation anxiety disorder. So separation anxiety tends to, in my experience, both in my own children and in my clients, tends to run longer in gifted kids than in non-gifted kids. Tends to be related to sensitivities, feelings of vulnerability, needing parents to help keep them safe and navigate the world when they're out there in the big and scary world. So often it is not uncommon for a person to Well, in our kids, it was like had it Velcroed to our legs as we're walking them, to school, and don't leave me. And my wife did not appreciate being the only mother at cheerleading camp, at the 50-yard line with our oldest who had the most of the worry monster. So you find yourself doing things that you wouldn't normally do as a parent. And, you just kind of have to work with it. And it takes time. And at some point, enough is enough. But I often find that a lot of the stuff works its way out. And maybe the sleepover comes a little later, or the sleepover needs to happen at your house first before it goes to someone else's house. Dun, 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 dun. God, you should have seen people's faces. Even before I said anything, I was like, oh, God, perfectionism. So this is not a real official diagnosis in the diagnostic manual. But this is a thing, a characteristic that runs rampant in gifted populations of all ages. And there's a lot of disagreement in the field, often of giftedness, because this is sort of perfectionism runs in gifted individuals so much, between the idea of, well, there's good perfectionism and there's bad perfectionism. Linda Silverman, close by, Gifted Development Center, talks a lot about good perfectionism or positive perfectionism, the kind that helps you be at your best, be on your game, push yourself. Now, a lot of people think, yeah, but most perfectionism is a fear of failure. And I think all perfectionism, bad perfectionism, is a fear of failure. It's fear. There's nothing good about fear. Where what Linda calls is striving for excellence. So striving for excellence, or positive perfectionism, is when you take risks, you do things over and over and over again to become better and better and better. But we all know that the perfectionism that strikes many of us comes in the form of fear, worry, not being good enough, not taking a chance unless we do it great. I had one client who apparently was a phenomenal 6-year-old swimmer, and at age 6, he told his parents, I will not do another swim meet unless you can guarantee I'll win every race. Now, it sounded bratty and bossy, but he was petrified of not being the best, right? So it takes people out of life. How about Steve Jobs? He apparently blew up lots of computers in his garage, right? Thomas Edison, how many light bulbs, do you guys know? How many light bulbs did he blow up on his way to inventing the light bulb? Anybody? How much? 10,000. Close. I don't have the actual number, but it's close. It's up there. It's like upwards of 1,000. I mean, it's a ton. Abraham Lincoln, how many times did he run for office before he actually won? Yes. I see a hand. How many? 42 times. That's a lot. I think it was 18, which is still crazy. Have you guys seen the poster of all the times? I mean, it's something crazy. And then, who else was I thinking of? Anyway, I was thinking of, the guy with the funny hair who has lots of businesses? No, not the Einstein guy. The big Trump. You know how many businesses that guy's blown up? Thank you. Good job. Yeah. Oh, if the Donald sees this, I'm in trouble. Okay. Anyway, so these guys, without thinking about any of these people's personalities, it's all striving for excellence. Anytime a person becomes great, and when I say great, I don't just mean great on a world or national scale, I mean on a personal scale, it is because you have pushed yourself and tried something, right? Athletes, people who have changed sports, X Games people, they break lots of bones because they're trying something, they're pushing the limit. I'm not saying to go become X Game people. I'm saying we have to push the limit because everyone here has a kid who has exceptional abilities. If you are a child here, you have exceptional abilities. The difference between gifted and talented often is the ability to do something and produce something. And there's a lot of debate on what's gifted and what's talented, and there's a lot of debate at the national level with the National Association of Gifted Children. And all I really care about is seeing people realize their potential. Because if you are bright, it doesn't buy you anything in this world alone. If you are bright and you have perseverance and resilience and coping skills, and you don't give up, you can do just about anything. And that's why fighting the worry monster is so important, because it's the worry monster and the perfectionism that keeps way too many really bright people underachieving and not feeling like they've met their potential. Eating disorders is the last thing we're going to talk about because it doesn't get talked about enough. So in anxiety. So eating disorders are dangerous. And of all of these things, they're the most dangerous because they can have the most physical effect on a body, right? So quickly, eating disorders are when a person really has a distorted view of themselves and really is looking towards a perfection of view in themselves. And over time, it becomes distorted and you see yourself differently. So if anyone sees their kids or students or anyone they know starting to restrict their eating in a serious way, over exercising, not feeling good about themselves unless they look a certain way, really, really hard on themselves, we just want to be aware of this. And again, I'm not saying over worry. The other thing that I have found from clients that I have consulted with who have dealt with this is whenever you go for an intervention with any kind of counselor or medical professional, usually the strict medical model without understanding a person's advanced thinking ability, it often doesn't work as well because a person feels marginalized and pathologized and feels less than. So while a lot of times kids do need some intensive treatment if they're having an eating disorder, the professionals involved really need to understand that the kids have the ability to really think things through and need to be treated with dignity and respect. Okay, deep breath. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Heavy stuff, I know. Okay, so that's our first phase. We've made it through the first phase. Those are the kind of ballparks of anxiety, worry. Those are the different ways the worry monster gets us. And now we know how our fight and flight survival response works and how the worry monster triggers it. Okay. Do we want our fear, fight, and flight response if we find ourselves in a dark alley in the middle of the night with shadows lurking? Yes, we do. Other than those and a few other circumstances, we don't need it activated. Okay, now we're going to talk about why do gifted kids and gifted people tend to be prone to anxiety. Okay. So these next two slides is a list from the book, A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children. People familiar with that book? Great Potential Press? It's a great resource. There's lots of lists of giftedness out there. They're all fairly similar. The ones that are in lime green are the ones that I think make these people more susceptible to the worry monster. Advanced comprehension of nuances. So, what these kids want and don't want at the same time is an amazing understanding of advanced adult things at a very young age. So much better to be clueless. There have been many times in my life I wished I were. So when you have a child who picks up on a lot of nuances, whether it's nuances in their parents, work, home life, relationship, nuances about taxes, about job, about school, about teachers, about politics, about anything, it's a lot for a little brain to kind of process when you haven't had a lot of life experience. Unusual emotional depth. Gifted individuals tend to have unusual emotional depth. Sometimes it's very helpful for having what we call social and emotional intelligence, and sometimes it doesn't come with any social and emotional intelligence. It comes with a total overload of emotion, which causes one to melt down. And we'll talk soon about overexcitabilities and how those overlap. Then you have abstract, complex, logical, and insightful thinking, all the different ways of seeing into things and seeing around things and seeing through things. How about idealism and a sense of justice? Okay, who here, people of all ages, think that things just aren't fair? Yes, and doesn't it really bother you? And don't you have trouble letting it go? I have bad news. That will remain, and life is not fair. But those of us who've lived longer than others have to deal with it a lot, and you learn to develop skills. But when you're younger and you're on the playground and people make up rules that are different than the rules that you make up, and people cut in line, or your teacher changes the schedule of what she promised you would do in the afternoon, these people tend to have very strong responses, right? And the very strong responses cause a lot of pain and a lot of worry and a lot of negative reactions. Intense feeling and reactions, that goes hand in hand. Highly sensitive, again with the overexcitabilities. Preoccupied with own thoughts, right? This is a regular gifted characteristic. Well, what if your thoughts are about all the interesting and scary things that go on in the world, right? One thing I don't recommend is watching the news, right? Unless you want to specifically develop a really poor outlook on life and go to bed worrying. I don't see any point. And I stopped watching the news a long time ago, because in case you haven't guessed, I'm one of these people. And my parents used to say, how are you going to stay up on current events? And I tell them, the good thing is that I work with people all day long, and I haven't missed one major world event yet. Not one. Right? We all get told the big ones. But what happens is the media is taking lots of things and getting more and more ratings for freaking people out. So if you are sensitive people and have sensitive kids, I don't recommend getting the news through those modalities. Ask probing questions. Why? And sometimes these questions are really tough for us parents to answer, right? How far do you go? And it's tough because you have someone who has a chronological age of this and an intellectual age of that, and you're trying to hedge which one are you trying to meet. Because sometimes the intellectual response will have someone having nightmares for a long time. Here's my rule of thumb. Start low, keep giving one, and hope they're good with it. If they're not, go to the next ladder. And if they're not, go to the next ladder and keep on going, because they often can let you know how much they can handle. I have a quick funny story about that where our oldest was she was compelled to know where babies came from at an age when it wasn't all that appropriate to talk about. So my wife put it off and off and off for as long as she could. And finally, she was so persistent, and her cousins were telling her things. And my wife went up one rung on the ladder, and then just with that rung, my daughter got as much information as she needed, and she said, "That's enough, I am not ready to go further." So I think we just have to ease up a little bit. The highly developed curiosity, again, that's asking more and more questions. And then you have divergent thinking. So now you're thinking things in all, divergent is really creative thinking. You're thinking about all these different things in all these different ways. And guess what? The worry monster can help you think about all the ways something will go wrong. Very creatively. All the most amazing creative ways that something bad is going to happen in the future, which we'll talk about, in the future, which has not yet happened yet. But that's what the worry monster does to us. Okay, overexcitabilities. We're still on gifted characteristics. So raise your hand if you have heard of overexcitabilities. Raise your hand if your children have overexcitabilities. Raise your hand if you have overexcitabilities. Yes, you can come out here. So, Kazimierz Dąbrowski was a Polish psychiatrist, psychologist, and he lived through World War I, World War II, and was a prisoner in communist Russia. He was an amazing, interesting guy. And like many who have experienced a lot of life, he developed a theory of personality called the theory of positive disintegration, which I highly recommend you reading about. My colleague has a book called Living with Intensity, Susan Daniels and Michael Pahevsky. And Michael Pahevsky was actually Kazimir Dabrowski's student, who interpreted all of this. It's a really cool theory, which I'm not going to talk about the whole theory, but just to let you know a little tidbit about it, it's the idea that depression, anxiety, and angst are necessary ingredients for personality growth. It goes away from just the pathological model that every time we're anxious or depressed, that means there's something wrong with us and we need medication to make it go away. That might be true, but not always, because it could be some of us who have had some pretty tough life circumstances would never want it to happen again, but also know that they would not be the same person if they didn't go through it and grow. So it's a good way to reframe your own pain that you might be experiencing and also your children's as they're going through their different growth points, as we want to learn and grow from the pain. We do not want needless pain. Needless pain over and over is not helpful, but pain for growth is. Some people think, no pain, no gain, right? I don't think Dabrowski came up with that. Okay, so the whole thing about overexcitabilities is the idea that these gifted people, he studied accomplished musicians, artists, and performers, and found that they were wired differently, almost like at the level of the neuron. So OE, overexcitability, was translated from superstimulate ability. So think of superstimulated, which we like a little better than overexcitability, because overexcitability means too much. And for those of you who know this, it can be too much, but the whole notion is it's superstimulability. And OE, think of original equipment. That's another way of looking at it. You're like wired this way. You come out this way. Your kids have come into this world this way, and you knew it early on. The whole idea is that these OEs permeate a person's experience, both to the interaction with the outside world and interaction with their internal world. And it's really intense, and it comes out of a lot of sensitivities. A lot of tentacles are out there, whether you like them or not. And there are 5 types of OEs, overexcitabilities. And as we're talking about this, think how many your kids might have and you may have. This time, the red ones are the ones that we're going to focus on, which I think tend to bring the worry monster around. Intellectual. So quickly, psychomotor is you're really, really active, your body's always moving, you have high levels of energy, and your body and feet and eyes might even be twitching. Okay? And it also can mean that your mouth never stops moving because you're talking a lot. Which relates to intellectual overexcitability, not to be confused with high IQ, is you have a constant thirst for knowledge, questioning, searching on the internet, researching lots of things which are deep and bring the worry monster. Because we all know if you have a symptom, the best thing to do is go on WebMD. Right? And a common cold can become MS in 1 second. Again, these are just all ways to realize we have to really manage this intake of information, because if you have an intellectual curiosity, you often end up knowing more than your doctors, which is another thing. But we have to manage it. It causes a lot of anxiety. Sensual overexcitability both has to do with appreciation for the aesthetics in life, food, sound, art, color, nature, but also comes with it a lot of sensory processing issues. This tag, I can't wear this tag. I need my socks to be inside out. I only like white food. Kids like, these lights are hurting my eyes. Did you hear that? You can hear something going on in the other room across the street. They hear the snow falling. Will you chew with your mouth closed and, stop looking at me? And you have all these sensory issues. It causes a lot of anxiety. A good friend of mine who's here tonight, who's fun to visit, was giving an example of her child who, the moment he walked into a summer camp with 30 kids bouncing basketballs on the first day, his hair was standing on end and he was ready to run because of his sensory issues was just overwhelming. And that's typical for these kids. It's typical, ordinary, but causes anxiety, right? Those tentacles are out. Imaginational overexcitability, I need to change to red because people have convinced me that one actually counts too, right? Because think of the high imagination that we talked about. Really strong imagination. to the point that sometimes you are not sure if your child really believes the things that they're saying or not. Well, they both believe them, and they're living in them, and let them live in them, of course, unless it gets dangerous. Emotional overexcitability. This was the cornerstone of Dabrowski's theory because he felt we were emotional beings. And these kids tend to be highly emotionally reactive and susceptible, both, again, to outside world and inner world. And again, to repeat, sometimes these are the kids that are drawn to people in pain. These are the kids that are the helpers. These are the kids that are the future counselors, the future teachers. They're also the kids that the teachers say they really need to mind their own business. But it's that they are drawn because they sense and feel the pain and injustices in the classroom, and they need to do something about it. On the other side, they could just flop on the ground and are overwhelmed every time they feel something. They don't know what to do with it. It's just a surge. That's an emotional overexcitability and tends to bring a lot of anxiety. Okay. Now, everyone know about twice exceptionality? No. Okay. By a brave show of hands, besides myself and my 3 kids, who else here is 2E? And if you're a child, be proud. Okay. It just so happens that twice exceptional individuals are the creators, innovators, inventors, right? These are things where a twice exceptional person is you are multi-exceptional in the areas of, well, you're advanced in your cognitive development, advanced thinking abilities. So you're on one end of the bell curve. You're on the other end of the bell curve because you also have a challenge area, right? So it could be you have attention problems, and more so than the average bear, like attention problems that get in the way. You may be, like myself and my kids, dyslexic. And most of us don't realize we're dyslexic because you just get by, right? But what it means is you have trouble, you can think like your peers, you can be invited to take all the GATE tests like your peers, but you don't get in the classroom because your scores aren't as high enough as your peers and your friends, right? But it just might be because you have challenge reading fast, or you're dysgraphic, you have trouble writing, you have trouble copying, you have trouble getting your thoughts on paper. And the only way people are asking you what you know is to write it out. You can talk about the fall of the Roman Empire or the new mod in Minecraft for 3 hours. All right. But if you have to write about it, you either refuse, melt down, write 3 sentences, and get a very bad grade. And now you are no longer smart, because the only way that we know that you're smart, of course, is if you read fast, do math problems really quickly, and write very long essays. Right? Wrong. But that's a lot of school, with no commentary on this district. Okay. The thing about being twice exceptional is, I'm going to tell you the good thing. Also, there's Asperger's disorder. People who have trouble reading social cues, understanding relationship, need a lot of prompting, trouble with transitions. So what happens is there is something that is keeping the advanced abilities from showing and causing stress and causing frustration and causing meltdowns. Because if you're gifted, you tend to expect to do everything to the ability that you do your most advanced skill, which could just be your reasoning ability, right? So if you walk into every classroom or any conversation and you already know everything that's being talked about, you expect to be that good at everything, right? Now, so this is hard for a lot of the regular gifted perfectionist people, but it's even harder for a twice exceptional individual because you can't make the thing happen the way you envision it, right? All right, so here's the good news about you 2E people. 2E people tend to have to deal with life adversity at a young age, which is a really good thing to have to deal with, right? Anyone who's here has also had to deal with adversity. If you're worrying about, if you're not 2E, but you have the worry monster, that's adversity, dealing with the worry monster. The people that I really worry about are the gifted people who have yet to deal with life adversity. And what happens is they eventually hit a wall and crash because they have never learned how to cope, They've never learned how to persevere, and the automatic assumption is if they have to cope and persevere and don't get something right away, they must be stupid, which of course is a false assumption, but you don't know any better. So anyone who's here, you guys already have a leg up on life because you're interested in the worry monster, which means that you have some adversity which you are going to have to be courageous with to overcome, which is going to set you up for life success later because adversity keeps coming. We don't know when, we don't know where, and we're not going to think about it because there's nothing we can do about it until it comes, but it does come. And we need to become friends with it instead of surprised by it. All right, we already went over this. Sensory integration, that's another one. Sensory processing issues. This happens a lot, and it makes being in a classroom very hard, makes being on a soccer field very hard, right? There's a whole bunch of different sensory issues, but it just makes using your smarts easily hard. So, as you can imagine, there's lots of challenges that twice exceptional people might face. It might be going into new situations because you can't read social cues. You have trouble when plans change. You have trouble taking tests. You have trouble showing what you know. You have trouble tying your shoes. You have trouble driving driver's license. You know what? There's a high percentage of people that I've come in contact with who are 2E, boys, mostly more than girls, who don't learn to ride bikes because of the coordination challenges earlier in life, and then you just kind of skip it. And these are the same kids that I find get their driver's license when they're 20 or 19 instead of 16. It just takes longer, and they need to wait till they're ready. And no big deal. I was visiting, has anyone heard of the school Bridges in Studio City, California? I was visiting there. It's sort of a really state-of-the-art school for twice exceptional kids, and I really liked what the director said. He said, we tell parents not to worry about age 18 as the age that everything is supposed to happen. We say take the longer view. 18 to 25 is really the age to kind of smooth everything out, get kids confident, and get them ready to be in the real world, and take the pressure off yourself if it's happening slower. And that's been my experience, too, with working with clients. There is no age these days that you have to be ready, but a lot of kids that I work with are anxious because they think they have to be ready, and they're not. So I'm just saying, as parents, we need to somehow kind of check in with what their expectations are, and by giving them an extra year or two, some people get this idea, whether they're told or they're infer, that they're moving out at this age. And sometimes parents are just kind of like joking, but they're taking it really seriously, and it causes a lot of pressure. Okay, so what does anxiety look like? Now think back to our model, right? Think back to the fight or flight response. So what do we see? I have a headache. I have a stomach ache. My youngest has a stomach ache Monday through Friday before school. Everything's cool on the weekends. She insisted last year on going to the doctor because there had to be something wrong. And the doctor did what the doctor was supposed to do and check her out and say, no, looks like it's okay. Maybe you just needed some breakfast, or maybe you need to relax in the morning. And we just went along with it, and then it slowly started to go away as she felt more comfortable in the school year. So you see a lot of these physiological symptoms. Sleeping difficulty, low energy, that sort of stuff. Loss of appetite, upset stomach. I had one poor guy who went to, one client, he went to the fifth grade camp for a week. He had to be brave. We worked on it for a long time. He quietly threw up every night one time. He just gutted it out. But again, it was a total anxious response from being away from home. Well, so that's the physical stuff. That stuff can be annoying, but not quite as challenging as this other behavior stuff, right? The kind of in your face, no, I won't, oppositional, meltdowns. So that's what we see a lot. That's what teachers end up having to deal with a lot, and what we want to do, part of the reason I got into the anxiety stuff is I was sitting at a lot of school meetings giving feedbacks from comprehensive evaluations that we were doing of kids who had behavioral issues, who were seen as kind of, they're troublemakers. But really what we were finding is they had a ton of anxiety, and that's how they were manifesting themselves. And a key thing was to try to build empathy, because if we could build empathy, then we could get away from the idea that the child is just being oppositional and get more towards the idea that there's someone who's struggling, and how do we help that person struggle less. Okay, deep breath transition. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we're getting to the part of what we're going to do about it. Part you've all been waiting for. So, the cognitive model of anxiety. So the worry monster. The worry monster is a combination of the cognitive model of anxiety, which is our thoughts affect our emotions and our behavior, a little mindfulness-based approaches, Eastern philosophy of we need to stay in the present and manage our thinking and not believe it all the time, coupled with narrative thinking, which is really where the worry monster concept comes from. And narrative thinking is really about helping people rewrite their life story, even if it's not on paper, by externalizing the problem so it's separate from them. Because if we think, I am anxious, that thing's too close to me. That means it's part of me. And really we want to gain space in this thing, and that's where the worry monster comes in. Because it is an outside thing that we are all ganging up on to help your child get rid of it. And then there's space to look at it, to demystify it, and make it go away. So with the cognitive part, we have excuse me, we have to look at the idea that our thoughts are always, our anxious thoughts are always lies, always exaggerations. So what happens is distressing thought comes. I'm going to fail. My mom is going to leave me and never return. I'm never going to make the team. There will never be peace on earth. I am never going to amount to anything. Okay, so we get this distressing thought, and then our amygdala, if it's a scary, irrational thought, will go off, right? The alarm bells will go off, and then we have lots of adrenaline going through our body, and now we have a behavior response, which is often, to simply put it, avoidance or meltdown. All right, parents. Who has a child whose main response to the worry monster is avoidance? How about meltdown? How about both? Yeah. Very, very common. So the whole notion is we need to slay and tame the worry monster. And the whole idea is, we're getting back to our plastic brain here, we need to use the big thinking brain, the huge thinking brain, to outsmart the little tiny what? You guys are awesome. The little tiny amygdala. It's tiny and it's weak, but the worry monster is turning it on. So we need to use the great thinking brains, our prefrontal cortex. So here's how we do it. We're going to start with cognitive interventions. We're going to go to mindfulness-based interventions, and then we're going to add behavioral interventions. You do not need to do all of these. What I can say is it is a recipe that you come up with your child to do whichever of these work. And I can tell you that each of these alone work. They also work great together, and sometimes you want to mix and match some of these strategies. But you just can come up with your own. Okay, first thing, we want to identify the thought. Now, I guess I had to jump ahead. There are some kids that are too young to identify their thought, and there are other kids who are just not there yet, insightful enough to identify their thought. So we're starting with the people who can. And I always say we start here if we can. So what you need to do is identify the thought. What are you thinking right now? And it's amazing that most of us adults go through life not realizing that we have all this inner voice, these thoughts. Like a lot of people are used to I have a kind of a critical voice, but this is like the worry monster is like just working on us nonstop. So you identify the thought, and then we need to help your child challenge it. Is it true? What do you mean you're going to fail a test? Have you ever failed a test? What do you mean everyone's going to laugh at you? What happened last time you went? Oh, Sasha laughed at you. How many other kids were there? 12? How many kids did you play with? 5? Oh, okay, so I guess maybe someone might laugh at you or might not think you're funny, but not everyone. And then we need to modify the thought, right? How do we modify it? Modify it so you change it. How about, well, I'm not all that good at math, but I study and I usually do okay. That turns down your amygdala compared to, I'm going to fail and never get into college. Which, let me just go on a rant about that. So that one is crazy, especially, I'm sure there's a few choice schools out this way, but like in where I come from, the thought is, I am never going to get into college, which means I'm not going to get into UC Berkeley or Stanford, right? I just did some research, and there are just under 5,000 colleges and universities in the United States. There is a place for everyone. There's a place for every bright mind. There's actually a place for every kind of mind. So the notion that a person is worrying that they're not going to get into college when they have a bright mind is crazy, and is the worry monster just running rampant. So we need to chill that one out, right? Or I'm going to fail. Okay, so then we replace the thought. I'm going to do fine. I always study. I work hard. I've never failed. It's going to be okay. I know this doesn't sound like this is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. Most of us, though, believe our thoughts. And often our thoughts are not that helpful. The little engine that could is the first cognitive theorist known to mankind. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. He got himself up the hill. That's all he said. How many of you get down the hall when it's dark at night? I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid. You have done it. You've done it. So one thing that we have to help kids do is talk to themselves. Talk themselves through a situation. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. That turns down the amygdala. Anytime you are thinking a different thought, you're kicking on your frontal lobe, which means you're putting blood back in there, right? Because to think, you need the blood in your brain, which takes it away from your arms and your legs. So self-talk is a very simple thing that you can use. People use all these things in sports, but they don't use them in life, right? They do. All these techniques for peak performance, but what about just getting through day to day? Okay, so those, we're going to get back to those, but those are a few cognitive techniques. So identifying a thought, changing a thought, challenging a thought. We're basically externalizing what the worry monster is telling you. And then some positive self-talk. So really simple concepts. Now, mindfulness-based stuff. Okay, so Eastern philosophy is really helpful and has really come into the psychology of human beings in the West these days. So the Dalai Lama says, very wise guy, he says something like, if you're worried and there's something you can do about it, then do something about it and don't worry. If you're worried and there's nothing you can do about it, stop worrying because there's nothing you can do about it. I listened to the Dalai Lama yesterday when it came to, was my plane going to get canceled? Was I going to ever get here for the first talk? And was everyone going to be disappointed in me? It worked. I slept fairly well, all right? And really, it was the whole notion of I have zero control over any of it. It is really relieving to give in to the lack of control that we have. And we all like to think that we have more control or feel like we need more control than we really do in a lot of things. You can't control who your teacher is. You can't control what your teacher says. You can't control what your coach says, whether your coach plays you. You can't control how hard the test is. All you can do is show up and do your best in any given moment. So the idea, which is slightly different than cognitive thinking, sort of an informal meditative technique, is we can notice our thoughts and not listen to them. So think of King Kong on the building, swiping at the planes. That's Western thinking, right? We are wrestling with the thoughts and we are battling them. Eastern thinking is we are watching the planes fly by. Just like the plane that says Toyota Sail-a-thon, county fair this weekend, and right, it keeps coming, and you're like, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is again. And at some point, it just goes away because you're not spending that much energy looking at that thought or that sign. That is something that we can teach our kids to do, is you don't have to believe every thought that you have. You can let it go. just like an itch. I challenge all of you during your next itch to not itch, and it goes away on its own. It's true. Okay. Now, staying present. This is the simplest and most important term or concept that any of us can grab our minds around. All right, I want everyone to focus right now on this moment. You're not thinking about anything behind you in the past, anything later. I want you just to focus right now, right here, right now. And take a few breaths while you're doing it. It's all good, right? Because nothing's wrong right now. Everything's wrong later. You know, is it snowing outside? How late is it going to be when we get home? I'm going to put the kids to bed. I got more homework. I still have to do emails. Got to make lunches. All that stuff. So one of the main things to talk to our kids about and for us to try to do is stay present. Right? The Dalai Lama also says those who live in the past tend to be depressed because the past has already happened, there's nothing you can do about it. And those who live in the future tend to be anxious because the future hasn't happened yet and there's nothing you can do about it. So we need to live in the present. It's so hard to do. I mean, I often feel like a fraud. I go around talking about this stuff and I realize like how hard it is to do. It's so hard to do. But if you can go through an exercise with your kids and write down everything they're worrying about, and help them realize that none of it has yet happened. The other thing that we find is that people who are professional worriers and perfectionists don't often know the difference between thinking and worrying. We just become used to worrying as a thinking process. And back to the idea of perfectionism and positive perfectionism, it's the whole notion, well, everything's going to work out okay if I worry about it. Because how else am I going to plan for everything to make sure that nothing goes wrong? Well, planning and thinking is different than worrying. Right? Does that make sense? You can think about something to problem solve and plan and prepare. That is different than ruminating and obsessing and thinking about all the things that could go wrong. So it's trying to take these thoughts apart. Okay, now we're going to really breathe. Everyone please put their hands on your stomach because we're going to do belly breathing for 30 minutes. Okay, the reason we're doing belly breathing is because when we breathe with our chest, that's run for your life breathing. Belly breathing is relaxation breathing. So what I want you to do is inhale on about a count of 6 or so, whatever feels comfortable, but you're pushing it a little bit. And then exhale the same amount. We'll do it about 6 times. And I'll try to guide us. Ready, go. One more time. All right, I got lost in it and I didn't guide you guys at all there. Sorry about that. Okay, who's a little more relaxed than they were a minute ago? It's really simple. And you can do it anytime, anywhere. You can do it with your family. You can do it in the morning. Some schools are doing it at the beginning of the day, at lunch, after lunch. People are saying it really helps. You can do it when you get home from school. You can do it at night. It's really grounding. It's all present focused. It's just focusing on the present. That's what meditation is, focusing on the present. And it's fascinating to see people realize that most of their anxious or all of their anxious thinking is future-based, because we just aren't aware of it, right? Okay, we're moving on to behavioral strategies. Bless you. Who remembers the classic movie, What About Bob? Great movie. Bill Murray had lots of anxiety, and his awful psychiatrist, Richard Dreyfuss, helped him free himself from his anxiety by being a really bad, annoying psychiatrist. It all worked out. And then Bob wrote the book, I think it was called Baby Steps, which was literally about putting one foot in front of the other. Remember with this little goldfish? Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. That's really what this is about, and again, it's that simple. I guess the thing that's crazy to me, the more and more that I've learned about this work and done this work, realize that the principles that help people overcome, tame the worry monster, they're simple. It just takes a ton of courage and a little bit of knowledge to put into practice. But each of alone, they're all very simple concepts. So the idea of baby steps is you figure out what the thing is that you're afraid of, or your child's afraid of, and you start at A and you work your way to Z. So this is where I always talk about my oldest, who's now just about 13, and I learned a lot through her and her different worry monsters. She had two big ones. One was that she refused to walk into school by herself and refused to let us leave in an appropriate amount of time. So, me being the dad who's supposed to know something, I took morning duty. And we worked from kindergarten through first grade on her, all kindergarten year in the summer, her walking in by herself. And what we did is we started with me walking her into her chair, waiting for her, putting her backpack in the backpack place, and doing everything with her. And then after a couple weeks later, I said, okay, we're going to start backing this out. I'll walk to right near your seat, but you're going to go to your seat by yourself. Now, she didn't like this all very much, but this took course over the whole year. The school was involved in it because they knew that she was really anxious. The drive-through guard was offering her ice cream. Everyone was willing to bribe her. She loved ice cream, but when it came to this, no way, no ice cream, nothing is going to get me to walk into school by herself. So week after week, I backed up a little bit. Oh, no. All right. All right, let's focus on the present. Everyone stay calm. I'll be right back. I always blow it. I blew it. This stinks. I can't believe I made a mistake. All right. Systematic desensitization, baby steps. Okay, so she refused this. She was not very happy with me. And week after week after week, we got closer and closer and closer. And I was not in her classroom. Then I'm a little bit next to the parking lot. And then I'm at the car where it was safe, where I could see her walk in. And every time she'd say, that's fine, but I'm not walking in next year. You know that. You're never going to get me to walk in because like most of your kids, she's fierce as well, fiercely independent at the same time. So during the summer, we drove around the circle. All right, we're going to practice getting out. Dad, this is dumb. Of course I could get out. It's not a big deal. And she would. And then there was the first week of school, and we were going to practice, and she'd only do it with her cousin. And then she would only do it with her friend. And so we practiced with her cousin and her friend, and they walked out together in real life. I was all fired up. Now the week window is over. You are required to walk in by yourself to manage all the traffic. So we are ready. And the day of, her friend and her cousin wimp out and say they want to go with their own parents. So now we are alone in the car. Car seat in the back, me in the front, big time. The whole family knew about this. Everyone, like half people were rooting against us. Half the people thought, oh, she could do it. So there's a long line to get in. We start to pull around. I look in the mirror. All right, how you doing? You ready? You can do this. I can do this. She's doing her self-talk. And we get right up to the last turn. Lots of people. She had all these sensory issues. I look in the rearview mirror, and her eyes go like this. full-blown anxiety is now underway. And I think a few things that I will not say on video. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do here? I'm like, you can do this. And she is frozen until she says, I'm not getting out. And then, what do you mean you're not getting out? We have 2 cars to go. I'm not getting out. You can't make me. So I'm like sweating now. I'm starting to panic. We're pulling up. And then I don't know what to do. She says she's not getting out. And then I see the principal, who was a little scary. And I said, if you don't get out, I'm going to get in trouble with the principal. And I don't know where that came from. But so, since she's a good rule follower, all of a sudden, she yells, fine, and she rips off her seatbelt, she grabs her backpack, she gets out of the car, she slams the door, and she marches in, and my heart's like, boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, I can't believe she just did it. So what happened when my wife picked her up is she apparently walked out of school about 4 inches taller and called everyone in the family to tell them what she did, this thing that she didn't care about that was stupid anyways. And from then on, it allowed her to take on her next things. And what I realized firsthand there is how gripping fear is, and how big the avoidance response and the compensatory I don't care response is, and how important it is to help kids accomplish something they're scared of, because it mushrooms into confidence, right? So fast forward one more example of a baby step, and also practicing, which is something that we're going to get to shortly. It's almost the same thing. Is she wouldn't look at people in the face when they talked to her because she was so anxious. You know, she was regular with family and close friends, and when it came to any other situation, which was most of the time, she looked like she had some serious social skill deficits, right? Like deer in headlights, wouldn't talk to people, would start acting funny, and it was intense anxiety. So I said, we're going to practice saying hi to people when we drive down our street at 20 miles an hour. Watch. She's like, what do you mean? That's stupid. Like, well, watch this. So I drove by, hey, Jim, and we drove by. I'm like, you try. So we drove by someone else. She waved. And I said, okay, now I'm going to drive a little slower. This is over a period of time. Drive a little slower, and then she would wave. And then, lo and behold, she'd say, slow down, slow down. I'm like, why do you want me to slow down? We weren't even practicing. She'd slow down. She'd say, hi, McKenna. You know, she'd start waving to people. And then I started practicing when we weren't even practicing. And then people would come to our door, which she used to like be petrified, and she'd say, I want to answer it. And all of a sudden, she's gaining this confidence. Then, we're in third grade, and she gets to go to her auntie's school because her auntie's a third grader. She gets to have a teacher. She gets to have an overnight, and this is big for her. And the other teachers tell my sister-in-law they can't believe how confident she was when she looked them all in the eyes, said hello, and shook their hands. Like, wow. And all because of silly, stupid practice. So this is just an example of taking one step and gaining a victory over the worry monster. And when that thing is boring, you go on to the next one. The fancy term is systematic desensitization. You desensitize a person to feeling anxious in a certain situation until you go on to the next one. When they're bored, you're ready, all right? And this stuff really, really works. Fake it to make it. This is where you have to enlist your child for an Academy Award-winning performance. You and I know that this is scary for you. What I want you to do is try to trick everyone when you go into your class, all right? You and I and your teacher are going to know that this is hard for you, but you are not going to let anyone know, okay? You're going to be an actor or an actress. And what happens is when you can fake it to make it, it actually changes your neurochemistry, and you have a better experience than you thought, and now you have a building block of success. It may not be great, but the worry monster doesn't want you to do it at all. So if you show up and you participate, you're winning. I have another very inspirational story of a client of mine who's a college student now, and he was just a few years behind socially and emotionally always, really bright guy. He tried going away to school his freshman year at a university which was about 4 hours away from his house. full-blown panic, social anxiety. He was not ready. And it was a huge devastation to him, huge devastation. His younger brother ended up going away to college before he was able to. He stayed back at the community college. And he had all of this intense fear and anxiety, always wondered why things were almost so much harder for him than other people, even though he wasn't aware that his grasp of history and government and political science was far beyond most professors. But that's not where he found value. He just wanted to be able to fit in. And he worked and worked and worked, and we did lots of work, and his parents did lots of work. He got into the college of his choice. He made himself join a fraternity and become an officer and become part of the executive board. And we talk every 2 weeks, and he just talks about his mounting victories against worry and the worry monster. And it's like he's 23 now, and he has his whole life ahead of him when he thought he was never, ever going to be able to accomplish any of this. And what happened was he gained some of these skills and realized, what he tells me is, he says, Dan, this week I'm making myself do X, Y, and Z. Because he now knows if he can't accomplish any of these goals, it puts that worry behind him, and then he's on to his next one. So it's just a really inspirational story about how this stuff works. Pleasure predicting goes with fake it to make it. Pleasure predicting is, how many of you out there, adults, never like going to the school meeting, the cocktail party, or the work party? Yes. And most always when you get back, you say, okay, it was a little better than I thought it would be. Right? So a lot of people, we have these patterns of this anticipatory anxiety, or we just don't want to do it, might be introverted. Pleasure predicting is helping our kids to predict how bad or good they think it's going to be. On a scale of 1 to 10, tell me how this is going to be. It's going to be a 1. It's going to be a 2. It's going to be a 3. And then ask them afterwards. Play the game. And what usually happens is it's more. They usually undercut it. You guys out there, you kids, I'm on to you. You never want your parents to know that they were right. So you usually say, even if it was an 8, you say, oh, it was a 5. It was a 5. But the thing is, it's usually better than you think, and then you can develop a pattern of understanding that the worry monster tells you something's going to be worse than it really is. And that's just a pattern that stays with a lot of us to adulthood. We've already breathed. We are not going to breathe again. Okay. Behavioral rehearsal is basically what I talked about before. Again, not rocket science. You do something over and over and over again that is on your worry list. I like when people make worry lists and then start to systematically tackle them. Some things you can just do. Other things you need to do your hierarchy of what's A, what's B, what's C, what's D. It doesn't matter how you do it as long as you're taking a step against the worry monster and doing something until it's boring. There's this guy whose work I like. His name is Howard Liebgold. He's a physician out of Kaiser, and he developed a class called the Phobies class. And he had hundreds of his own anxieties, which is where his work came from. He was not a psychiatrist. He was I forget which kind of physician he was. He was in rehab. But he talks about in his book how he was afraid of bridges, so he would drive over like 100 bridges a week before they were as expensive as they are now. So basically over and over and over again until something wasn't scary anymore, right? So pick one thing, and parents, it's okay to motivate externally, right? Incentivizing. Not bribing, incentivizing. The same thing that gets you to do things every day at home and work that you don't want to do because there is an outside reinforcer. It's the way the world works. Why would anyone want to do something that's scary to them by choice? You need a carrot, and carrots are okay. It's usually a very important part of the plan. You got that, guys? Kids out there? I just got you something. Right? A little more Minecraft, right? An extra mod, you know what I'm talking about? You try this, 15 extra minutes, everyone wins. Okay. Take a risk. So now we're going to a few for the perfectionists. Take a risk. We need to help a perfectionist take a risk. We need to help someone who's scared take a risk. Motivate someone to take a risk. You adults take one with them. Right? Kids often have this feeling like we're perfect and we've already always accomplished everything we set out to do and we've got everything wired. We don't, and it doesn't help them to think that we do. We do not have to have our stuff together all the time. We need to be human and get down and dirty with them. Prescribed failure. Ooh, perfectionists do not like this. I like to see perfectionists become perfectionistic about not failing. About failing. Become perfectionistic about being able to fail, not doing something perfect. Turn in an assignment that is okay. When your teacher says you don't have to do an outline, you can just turn in your rough draft, just turn in the rough draft. See what happens if you don't do the entire annotated bibliography. See if your teacher notices. Do you ever wonder why the person who does 2 pages gets the same grade as you who does 10 pages? What's fair about that? I got an idea. Keep doing 10 pages and seeing if it changes. No. Okay? So how do we find ways to help a perfectionist do it differently, less than, and be okay? Right? Because we still survive when we don't do something perfect. The computer still works. We're all good. It did not run out of batteries. Okay. We're home stretch, and then we'll do some questions, and then you guys probably want to go to bed. Okay. So, here's the deal. The worry monster is weak and puny if we know how he works. It's that simple. So if we know that he makes us scared by giving us thoughts that activate our amygdala, that little puny thing in our brain, to send the adrenaline through our body and give us all those physiological responses that make us feel awful. And he's trying to use our amygdala, emotional brain, to overpower our thinking brain. And if we can use our thinking brain, the big thinking brain, we can use this here to overpower the little amygdala inside. We then can find ways to access our thinking, understand what the worry monster is telling us, modify it, change it, challenge it, be scientists, see if it's true. Set up behavior strategies to one by one tick off your victory list. I have one client who on his door has a picture of the brain with the amygdala. Below it, he has a list of the thoughts that the worry monster tells him. And below that, he has his victory chart. And he and his mom add to this victory chart every time he takes one of these things on. Okay? It's really cool. It's really motivating. And it's inspirational. And the thing is, you guys can do it too, and you just got to try one thing. Because every victory makes the worry monster weaker. Every one thing. Okay, so I would like everyone to pledge that we're going to try to conquer the worry monster and know that we just have to do it one victory at a time. Deal? We're closing up? We're unfortunately closing up. Thanks for coming, you guys. It was fun.